Hey guys, what's going on? And welcome back to another programming tutorial. Today we're going to be taking a look at AWS Cognito. Cognito can be used to add user registration and login functionality to your application. So we'll be looking at how to set things up on the AWS side and then how to integrate with our client application. So if that sounds good, stick around and let's do this. All right, guys, so before we start coding, let's just have a brief overview of what Cognito is and what it does for us. So basically, AWS Cognito is an identity provider and users directory. All right, so it makes it very easy for developers to add sign-in, registration, sign-out functionality to their web applications. So Cognito provides identity tokens for signed-in users for authentication, and basically handles the entire authorization backend for us. In this tutorial, we'll be creating a Cognito user pool, which is basically a database of users, and then using a client-side library called AWS Amplify to implement sign-in, sign-out registration and call the various Cognito API methods. All right, and we'll do this all using JavaScript in the front end. Now, Cognito uses JSON Web Tokens to manage sessions and stores the tokens in local storage on the client side. So the great thing about using the Amplify library is that there's no need to manually manage or refresh these tokens, as the library takes care of all of this for us behind the scenes as necessary. So one resource you guys might want to check out if you're going to be doing some more work with Cognito using the Amplify library is the Amplify documentation, the JavaScript documentation here. And I'll add a link in the description of this video, but basically it goes over in fairly good detail most of the common methods or API calls that you'd want to use, like auth.signin, auth.signup for registration, sign out, change password, forgot password, and basically anything you'd want to do with a user in terms of authentication. So this is just a good resource, and this forms pretty much the basis of this tutorial. So even if you don't check this out, don't worry, we'll be going over everything in detail in this video. Just want to mention that. All right, so to give us something to work with here for this tutorial, I'm going to ask you guys to download my starter app. It's Hexal Energy starter app. It's just a very bare bones React application. And you may have seen this before if you've gone through any of my serverless tutorials, create a serverless app. We use this application. And again, I'll add the link in the description of this video, but the AWS Cognito version of the Hexal app basically gives you the finished code at the end of that create a serverless app tutorial. So don't worry at all if you haven't gone through that tutorial. It's not necessary for this. I wanted these to be completely decoupled, so you'll have the basic React app with just basically a blank sign up page, login page, registration page, and a few other authentication related pages. So there's absolutely no Cognito logic right now if you download the starter version, and that's basically what we'll be adding over the course of this tutorial. All right. So let's see, what else did I want to mention about this? I think that's it, and we'll go over all the pages in detail throughout this tutorial. So just go ahead and download that, and we'll go through how to get it set up before we start coding. All right. All right, so let's go ahead and get the client app set up and running. So first of all, let's navigate to the folder where you want this to live. All right, and go ahead and open up your CLI. I'm just going to use git bash. And let me increase the font size here a little bit. All right, so we just want to clone this project into our folder here. So let me go ahead and grab the URL. I'm going to go back over to GitHub. And again, this is going to be in the description of the video, so you guys can just grab it from there. All right, I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to do git clone and then copy and paste that repository URL. All right, that's going to go ahead and download the project. So the next thing I'm going to do is cd into that directory. And I'm going to run a npm install, npm I to install all of the dependencies. And I'll just pause the video until that's complete. All right, and it looks like we're done here. So the next thing I want to do is to install the AWS Amplify library because the starter application doesn't come with that. So let's do let's do an npm I AWS-amplify. All right, and once this library is installed, then we'll go ahead and fire up the application and just make sure it's working in our browser. All right, and Amplify is now installed, so let's go ahead and invoke our start script and get the application up and running. So I'm going to do npm run start. Okay, and that should open up our application in a new browser. All right, and there we go. Here is our Hexal client application. So just in case you guys have not seen this before from some of my other videos, I'll just give you a quick tour of the application. So this is the home page. Then we've got a products page. It's going to list the products that we have in our DynamoDB database. None of this is really relevant, by the way, for Cognito, just giving a quick overview of what we've got here. So products list page. The admin page is where you can add new products or delete existing products. All right, but what we're really going to be focusing on here is login and register at first and a few more pages down the road. So login, well, it's still got the last things I used here. But basically, this is a simple login form. It doesn't do anything right now. It's got some simple validation. So it's going to say all fields are required. And basically, registration is the same thing, except this is where new users sign up, obviously. But, I mean, none of the call to actions are really connected to anything right now. And that's really the main goal of this tutorial, to get all of this integrated with Cognito. So we actually have functional login and sign up with our AWS Cognito backend. All right, so let's take a quick look at the source code. All right, guys, so I'm here in my code editor, and I just wanted to give a very brief tour of the starter application. All right, now this is a very bare bones React.js application. And don't even worry if you've never used React. It's very basic, and you know, as long as you have a little bit of a background in JavaScript, you'll be able to follow along just fine. So the first thing I want to look at here is the source folder, and that's where all of our, most of our primary code is going to be located. So the first thing we'll work with is the config file. So we're just going to add a few properties here to, you know, there's like a Cognito user pool ID, as well as a client app ID and a region. So this is just kind of the primary glue that holds together our client app and our AWS Cognito backend. So we'll make some changes here. The next thing is the app.js file. And this is sort of the main container, if you will, or entry point into our front-end application. So this file will add a few properties here to let the application know, basically, first of all, if a user is authenticated and what user that is, if they are. And then we'll pass those properties or that state down to all of our nested components so that the entire application is sort of in sync with the current state of authentication. All right, and then the last thing I want to point out is the components folder. This holds all of our React components, which basically relate to pages, right? There's one for our products page, one for our admin page. So it's pretty much one component per view or per page, with a few exceptions. Anyway, most of what we'll be working with is under the auth folder here. So source components auth, and then we pretty much have one component for each view that we'll be using in our auth flow. So let's take a look at the register component. And all of these components are pretty much structured the same way. So, you know, once you understand one of them, you'll understand all of them. All right, so at the top of the component, we have state. Okay, and this is sort of a local state, local to the component. So it's not application-wide. Just our component sees this. And you can see we've got fields for username, email, password, and a few other things that we'll need to pass in via Amplify when we invoke our AWS Cognito endpoints. All right. And there's a couple of utility functions here to clear that state when we need to. And then we have our handle submit function. So this is the function that's going to be invoked when our form is submitted. Okay. So it's going to do some basic validation first, and then we're going to call AWS Cognito. And basically all of the authorization components have this comment here, AWS Cognito integration here, so that you can easily tell, where we need to start writing our code for this tutorial. So we'll be adding some integration code for each of these authorization components. All right, and then down below in our render function, we just have our page HTML. So this is a basic form. It collects the username, it collects an email, and it collects a password, and then a password confirmation. So like I mentioned before, there's no functionality here right now except to do some basic validation. But basically when this form is submitted, it's going to set all of those inputs that it's collected from the user into state, and then we can then use that state to pass into Cognito. All right, now don't worry if that doesn't make sense. We're going to go through all this line by line. I just wanted to give a little bit of a high-end overview or a high-level overview before we start coding. All right, so with that out of the way, let's go ahead and set up our AWS Cognito user pool in the AWS console. So I'm going to go to my browser, and I'm going to open up the AWS console and go ahead and log in. All right, and I'm going to navigate to Cognito. If you don't have it in your recently visited services, you can find it up here, or just type in Cognito into the search box. All right. And let's go to Manage User Pools. All right, and you should be at the Your User Pools page, and I'm going to go ahead and create a user pool. Let me make my font a little bit bigger here, just to make sure you guys can see this clearly. All right, so I'm going to click on Create a User Pool. Okay, that may be too big. Let me. All right, hopefully that is good. All right, so the first order of business is to give our pool a name. I'm going to call it Hexal to match my fictitious company there. And you know what, still maybe a little bit too big. Hopefully you guys are still able to see it at this level. All right, so got my pool name. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to go by line on the left-hand menu here. So let's go to Attributes. How do you want your end users to sign in? So we got a couple of different options here. Now I want them to be able to sign in using either their username or their email. So I'm going to leave username selected, which is the default, but I'm also going to add allow sign in with verified email address. All right. I'm going to leave the rest as is, the defaults, and click on Next Step. All right, now here's how you set the sort of model for how you want your password requirements to look. I think I'm going to leave everything here at the defaults. We've got, so a minimum length is 8, require numbers, require special character, require uppercase, and require lowercase. So just try to remember all these requirements when we go to create our first user. And if you're missing something, it'll reject it with an error message. So. All right, let's go ahead and click on Next Step. All right, multi-factor authentication. That's basically if you want to have a second layer of security when your users log in. For example, typing in a code that they'd get via SMS or clicking on a link via email. We're not going to do that for this tutorial. We're going to keep things simple, so just leave everything as is here. Click on Next Step. All right, message customizations. Now, this comes into play whenever we have a new user come and register on the site. So once they register and submit that form, Cognito is going to send them an email so that they can verify their registration. So we've got two options for that, either by code or just clicking on a link. So I'm going to change it to link because it's just easier for the user and it's less code that we have to write. We'd have to write some additional code to have the user input their code and then submit that. So link is just easier all the way around. All right, let's, nothing else we need to do here. Next step, tags, we're not going to worry about that right now. So let's do next step. Devices, next step. App clients. So we'll need to add an app client. This basically says, okay, what applications are going to be using this Cognito user pool. So we have our Hexal client app, so we're going to need to add that. So let's click on Add a Client App. For the name, I'm going to write Hexal. All right, we want to unselect Generate Client Secret just because that doesn't play well with the JavaScript SDK. Enable sign-in for API server-based authentication. Sure, let's go ahead and select that. That's basically if we're going to want to do any work with the command line interface that'll allow us to add in our access key and secret access ID. So we won't use that for this tutorial, but let's just go ahead and select it just in case you guys want to use that later. So let's do create app client. Okay. And let's click on next. Triggers, we're not going to do anything here. So click on next step, review. So I think everything looks good here. And let's go ahead and create pool. Oh, what happened to my name? My name not get saved? Let's try that again. Hexal. I think I just didn't click out of the field or something. All right, let's try that again. I'm going to go back to review. You must provide a name parameter. Okay, wonder why my name's not being saved here. You know what? I think, it's a little bit weird. At one of these stages, there's a save button. Maybe I missed that. I think it's under message customizations. Save changes. What the hell? Why is my pool name not being saved? All right, looks like it may have saved at that time. Okay, review. There we go. I think that's a bug with the UI here. I've never had that happen before. Anyway, go ahead and create pool. Hopefully you guys don't run into that same issue. Your user pool was created successfully. All right, great. So that's all we need to do for now in terms of the AWS UI. Now the next order of business is going to be to add some of these IDs to our config file in our client-side application. All right, so let's go ahead and open up our code editors and let's set up our Cognito configuration. So under the source folder, if you expand that, there should be a config.json file. Let's go ahead and open that, and I'll increase my font size here as well. So zoom in. There we go, that should do it. All right, so right now there's an API with an invoke URL. This is for our API gateway from the last tutorial. So let's go ahead and just create a new property right below that. And let's call it Cognito. Okay, and we'll just set this to an object. All right, now underneath Cognito, we'll need 3 properties. Region. All right, we'll set these to empty strings for now. User pool ID is the second one. User pool ID separated by underscores. And finally, app client ID. App client ID. All right. So for the region, I'm just going to go ahead and put US West 2. But make sure you just enter in whatever the current region is where you created your user pool. The other 2, user pool ID and app client ID, we can get from AWS. So let's toggle back over to the browser. And if you're on general settings, or if you go to general settings, you can find your pool ID here. So let's go ahead and copy paste that. Go back to our editor and enter that in for your user pool ID. All right, let's go back to the browser and grab our app client ID. And so this one we can find down under App Clients. And there it is, App Client ID. So go ahead and copy paste that. Toggle back to the editor and let's paste that right here. All right, and don't forget to save your file. Okay, now that we've got that set up, we'll need a way that our application can read in these variables when it starts up so that once we connect to Cognito, we know we're talking to the right user pool and app client. All right, so we can do that in our index.js file. So let's go ahead and open that up. All right, first we'll need to import a few things. So I'm going to go right under app here. I'm going to do import Amplify. So we're importing our client library, Amplify, from AWS Amplify. That's the package name. All right. And right below that, I need one more import statement. So I'm going to do import config from /config. All right, so now we've got our Amplify library and our config file imported. All right, so let's go right below our last import statement here and above our React DOM render. And we can call Amplify configure and then pass in our config. All right, so I'm going to do amplify.configure, open parentheses, and then this is going to take an object. All right, and the property is called auth. Okay, and that's going to take another object. And then there are a couple of properties, 4 properties we need to enter in here. So the first one is mandatory sign in. Yep, we're going to set that to true. All right, and then below that we'll have our region. And we'll get this from our config file. So config.cognito.region in caps. All right. Next line, we'll do user pool ID. Okay, and that's going to come from config.cognito.userPoolID. All right. And finally, we've got user pool web client ID. All right, this is all in camel case, all right? And then this will equal config.cognito.app_client_ID. All right, that's a lot of typing, but we're done. We only need to do that once. So now every time our app basically starts up, it will call this Amplify configure, and then that will kind of ensure that we're connecting to the right user pool and client ID. And don't forget to save the file. All right, now that is pretty much it in terms of our setup for Cognito. So one thing you can do is just check the browser and make sure you don't have any errors. So find whatever tab you've got the app opened in and just make sure that it's still loading, you don't have any errors. Now, one side note here, with this React application, it will reflect the changes immediately. So once you click save, or once you hit save, after making any code changes, we don't need to restart the application or anything like that. It will reflect the changes immediately. So that's pretty nice, saves a lot of time during development. Okay, so I think we're going to stop the video here, and I don't want this to go on too long. It's already a little bit longer than I expected. But I'd rather have several short videos rather than one long one. So it's a little bit easier to follow. All right, so I think we're pretty well positioned to start coding the registration page and the login page, which we'll do in the next video. All right, guys, thanks for sticking with me, and see you in the next video.